Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to have you joining us. Uh, Again, we're preparing to uh, go through the Fast Track Workforce Incentive Grant Program. If you were logged on this morning and you've logged back on this afternoon, you're certainly welcome to stay, but it will be covering basically the same information, the same presentation. So stay if you wish, but I just wanted to give you a forewarning that that's what you would be experiencing. A little bit of housekeeping before we start the presentation about today's webinar. Uh, Please keep your phone or your computer microphone muted, if you will. Again, with a large number of attendees, we had quite a few in the morning session. It can get pretty noisy in the background, so we certainly hope that you will do that. You can submit your questions via the chat function during the webinar. We will, depending on what the questions are, we may take a break at various points to try and catch up on those. If we don't, or you ask one later in the process, we'll certainly save some time at the end to also go through any remaining questions that you might have. In addition to using the chat function for questions, we would appreciate if you would tell us who you are. We're trying to determine the reach of this webinar and see who and how many have logged in. So if you could use the chat function to send us your name, what institution or organization you're with, and then the number of people that are participating along with you, sharing your screen. That would certainly help us to be able to document who's been involved and how many folks we've reached out to as we've done these webinars. The final thing is we will have a link to the recorded webinar that'll be sent out later. Again, it'll be available on our website. So you can get to it afterwards if you have any questions, or you know of someone who was unable to attend this particular webinar. You'll be able to share that link with them, and they can get in on all the information that we've provided. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and begin. Again, I always like to start with an agenda so folks know where we're going and how we're going to get there. So I wanted to start with a brief program overview, kind of lay some groundwork about where the program came from, what the basics are. Talk a little bit about the administrative rule that we're in the process of putting in place to administer the program, and then talk a little bit about the situation with approved programs, kind of where we are with that, and also where we're going to be headed and how we're going to make some changes. In addition, again, I didn't introduce myself. Again, this is Leroy Wade. I'm the Deputy Commissioner here at the Department of Higher Education. I also have Kelly Reed, Senior Associate for Student Financial Assistance, with me. So at that point, once I finish up the approved programs, Kelly will take over and we'll go through the process from a student perspective, what they can see, and then we'll walk through the application. And then we'll change over and walk through what the schools will experience, the kinds of processes we'll have in place on the school side as well. The final slide or two will be about department asks, things that we would ask you to do to help us administer the program. And then, as I said, we will have time, I'm sure, at the end of the presentation for any questions that you may have. So with that, we'll move on, again, with the program overview. Many of you know the program was established in legislation earlier this year, and the governor signed Senate Bill 68 on July 10th, making the program effective. I should say that it isn't really effective until August 28th. That's when all legislation goes into effect unless it has an emergency clause. But we are in the process of ramping up this program, obviously, for the 1920 academic year. So even though it was just signed less than a month, or about a month ago, we're in the process of trying to get this thing going, and obviously we've already got an application online, so we're trying to move pretty quickly with this. You may ask, why have such a program? What's the benefit? Why would we create a new financial aid program like this? And there are a couple of good reasons. One relates to trying to meet our big goal of 60% of working age adults having a quality certificate or degree by 2025. We've learned early on that we'll never be able to reach that goal if all we do is work with those traditional students that are coming directly out of high school and into college. That's an important population for us to work with, and we want to increase the number of students that make that transition and are successful. But if we're going to really get the state where it needs to be and really have the ability to fully capitalize on the potential of having 60% of working adults with post-secondary credentials, we've got to reach out to populations that we've not reached out to or that we've not been as successful as serving as we have in the past. Adults are one of those, and so this program hopefully will provide some pretty important incentives so that those individuals are able to access that additional education and get those credentials. So that's kind of from the state, the department's perspective. That opening doors for adults, though, is important in any number of ways. One, it helps those individuals seek the training that they need in order to have a meaningful workforce experience. By getting a certificate or a degree or a recognized credential, that can certainly open doors either for new jobs or advancement, but also helping those who are unemployed or between jobs gain the skills that they need. And then finally, it really is a much broader benefit to Missouri because individuals that go through this program, in order for it to remain a grant, must live and work in Missouri after graduation. And so the real goal here is to try and ramp up Missouri's workforce, both for the benefit of the individual, but also for the benefit of Missouri and the Missouri economy. As I referenced in that previous slide, it does include a residency and work requirement in the program. We want to be clear with students that that's the nature of this program. It is a grant up front, but there are requirements after graduation for them to live and work in the state. There is a one-year grace period after they graduate in order for them to secure employment, full-time employment, and the program does require, in order to avoid it being at least partially converted to a loan, that you be full-time employed or self-employed within the state of Missouri for 3 years. If you don't fulfill that requirement, then it results in the conversion to a loan. It's 1/3 for each year. So if I work 1 year and then I leave, the full amount doesn't convert to a loan, but those remaining 2 years would convert to a loan. That loan is an interest-bearing loan. It's set at the federal direct student loan interest rate. And in addition, we've established a 10-year loan period during which the students that are in that situation would be required to make payments and pay off their obligation. Now moving on to the administrative rule, as you may know, again, often legislation provides a skeleton or a framework for a program, but there are many details that need to be worked out in order to have an effective program, and so that everyone understands what the role and scope and responsibilities are for that. And so we've been in the process of working on administrative rule for several months. We've worked with our State Student Financial Aid Committee several times in order to begin that drafting process. We took a draft to the coordinating board at their June meeting for their review and for conversation, and we've continued to work since then. And then there at the end of July, we sent out our current draft to our state aid listserv, so that we could gather some additional comments as well about that and how the program is operating, or is proposed to operate. So that comment period ends at the end of business today. So if you still have comments you want to make, I encourage you to get those in. If we get late ones, we'll try and incorporate those. But as you can see with the next bullet, this is all headed toward the coordinating board meeting on September 11th. So we'll have to have time to pull all that information together, do any revisions that we need, and then get it to the board so they'll have time before the meeting to make decisions about that. So I encourage you, if you're going to comment, to please do so as soon as possible. Once the board approves it, there is a continuing rulemaking process. Now, we will administer the program. Once the board has acted, established the policies and the framework for the program, we can proceed with the operation of the program, but we do need to also proceed with getting that administrative rule in place as well. That process usually takes about 6 months, assuming we get all of our deadlines in line, and so we will work with the Secretary of State on that. There is an additional 30-day comment period during that process, so again, there will be another opportunity for input from the larger community, and then we're projecting that it'll probably be finally eligible or implemented in the spring of 2020 when it's actually finally in place. Now I want to talk a little about approved programs. we've had some issues with this, and so I want to try and clear up any misconceptions or confusion about that. At its June coordinating board meeting, the board approved fast track program categories. It was done at the 4-digit SIP level, which are relatively broad categories of instructional programs. As we've looked at the programs that are within that and tried to figure out the implementation process, the decision was made to limit the initial rollout of programs to STEM and STEM-related programs, and that does include agriculture. If you've ever looked at the STEM listings that various organizations put out, some of them include agriculture, some of them don't, and there really isn't a single source point for the designation of STEM programs. We felt it important in Missouri to include it as a STEM program, and then in addition to those, teacher education. So that's at this point, that's the category of programs that will be eligible. Programs in the other subject areas that were approved by the coordinating board are still under review, and we hope in the near future to begin to add some additional of those. If you're interested in what programs have been approved or are on our list, they are available on our webpage. We have a fast track webpage that's up and running, so we can work through that as we go forward. The non-credit and career and technical programs we hope to add soon. We have an issue with our program inventory. The data that we receive comes from other sources, and we've run into some problems that we didn't anticipate in that. But we hope to have those worked out very shortly so that we can include the non-credit programs that are available at the community college and also at the career and tech centers. So as I've looked, I'm going to back up. I think I must have skipped a slide. Yes, I did. So I apologize for that. Sometimes computers don't act the way you think they should, so I skipped right over that. I did want to spend a minute to talk a little bit about funding because there's been some questions and some concern about that as well. So for FY 2020, the fiscal year we're in right now, the legislature appropriated $10 million, all from lottery funds. The importance of that is that lottery funding means that, based on a constitutional provision, that participation is going to be limited to public institutions for this current fiscal year. The Constitution says that funds from lottery can only be used for public education. In addition to that, again, obviously we have to be able to prioritize that. We're not sure is $10 million going to be enough, so we need to be prepared to prioritize our applications. For this first year, that will be established through the fast track application date, the date on which the student submits that application. If you've looked at the statute, it talks about giving priority to renewal students, and we will certainly do that. But again, we won't have renewal students until the next fiscal year, and so they will take front row once we move into the next fiscal year, and then underneath that we will continue to prioritize based on the fast track application date. For FY 21, again, just to give you a little bit of foreshadowing, we're in the process of putting together our requests that will go to the governor for funding in this coming, for new funding in this coming fiscal year. Our plan is to request full funding for the fast track program so that we can incorporate all programs and all institutions into that process. So I'll try and move back to where I was before. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Kelly, and she's going to work through what students do.
Well, and before we get into too much detail about what students in schools can expect, we wanted to kind of provide you with a 30,000-foot view of what the process is like. So that's what this slide does, is just kind of acclimate you to what we'll talk about as we go through. So everything starts with the student when they apply. And as Leroy had mentioned, this could become a loan, so we have to do all of the things that private lenders are required to do in order to make sure that the students are aware of the loan options that they have. So when they apply, there is a disclosure, a truth in lending disclosure that they have to view. And there's also a self-certification form that they have to complete in order to get a disbursement. Once the student applies, they submit that application to us. We'll review it for eligibility and notify the school if the student is eligible. and then update the student's eligibility in the student portal so the student can track their eligibility. Once we notify the school of their eligible students, then the school does their own eligibility review and certifies the award information and provides the student with loan counseling. Once they've done all of that, then they send the list back to us in a file where we do a little bit more eligibility verification, calculate the student's award based on the information that the school provided, and send the second disclosure notifying the student of the award, and we also send the promissory note to the student at that time. Then the student will return the self-certification form, the promissory note. Hopefully they will accept what the school has certified. They could reduce the amount of the loan request so that they don't have to take out any more than they want to, or they could decline the award entirely. So once we have that information back from the student, we would notify the school of the pending disbursement and send actually disperse the funds and send the disbursement disclosure to the student. And then at that point, the school would deliver the funds to the student's account, and hopefully then you have a happy student. So when the student applies, they do that through the student portal that we have on the estimated eligibility tab. They will have to register for access to the portal in order to gain access to the application. The application then, as I said, is available on the Estimate Eligibility tab of the portal. They'll come in here. Eventually, Fast Track will be included as part of the estimator, which is a tool that students can use they answer a series of questions, and it tells the student these are the programs based on the answers to the questions. These are the programs that you might be eligible for. Fast Track isn't in that yet, but it will be. For now, the students have to click on the Apply link, and that takes them into the application. The first section of the application is just an overview of the program. We tell them up front this could become a loan. We also tell them the eligibility criteria so the student doesn't waste time filling out an application if they know that they're not going to be eligible for it. So we want it to be upfront as much as we can with the students. The next section is the demographic information. In the actual application, this information will be pre-populated based on the information they provided when they registered. To protect privacy, we had to strip that information out. That's why this slide is a little bit fuzzy, so we apologize for the fuzziness. But the students will see the demographic information that they provided. If they want to make any changes to this information, they'll need to do that on the My Profile page of the student portal. We do offer a service where the students can opt in to receive texts whenever their eligibility changes. If they have opted into that, then they must provide a cell phone number either in the application or on My Profile before they can get the texts. The next section of the application deals with the program information. So here's where we kind of get down to the nitty-gritty of what the student is applying for. The list of institutions in the institutional drop-down is limited to only schools where they can actually receive a Fast Track award. So the student will select what institution that they are interested in, and then they go and select the location. Some schools offer programs at different locations. Once they select the location, then they will see in the program of study drop-down a list of all of the programs that are offered at that institution and location combination. One thing that you need to be aware of, in the locations there is an online option, and that is an option that is in our program inventory, but there aren't actually, it's a holdover, so there aren't any programs tied to that location. Any online classes that you would offer would be under the main campus. So we've had a little bit of confusion from students. They know that they're taking their class online, but when they select the online location, the class isn't there. I'm sorry, not the class, the program isn't there. So when that happens, the student just needs to be aware they need to look under the main campus location. the degree level and the program start date, we are collecting to help us try and figure out how long a student's program is going to be so that we can manage the financing. We don't want to cut off a student, if they're in a 2-year program or even a 1-year program that's 2 semesters. We don't want to cut off funding in the second semester just because we simply ran out of money. We want to try and reserve enough funding so that we can carry them through. And the only way to do that is to know how long their program is and when they start to make sure that we have the money available for them. And then finally, there is the last date enrolled in high school or post-secondary program. There's only one eligibility validation on the application, and that is are you 25 years or older, or if you're less than 25, have you been out of school for at least 2 years? And so that's what this field is used. It's used in that validation. The next section is references. There are the student has the opportunity to provide 3. We do require that they provide at least 2, and at least 1 must be from a non-family member. This slide, in the presentation, we only have the references section once, but this section basically is replicated 3 times on the application. Once they've provided all of their information, in order to complete the application, they have to view and acknowledge the first truth in lending disclosure. There is a link to it. They scroll down through it. Hopefully, they are reading as they are scrolling and not just dragging the mouse down the page. They have the opportunity to print that disclosure at that time, or the disclosure is saved to their workspace so that they always have the opportunity to view it at any time. There is an acknowledge button, so once they acknowledge it, then they come back to the application and the I have read and understand the loan disclosure information provided certification appears. They do have to check that box before they're able to submit the application. The second thing that they have to do is download and complete the self-certification form. If they miss downloading it here, well, they have to download it here. If they lose the form at some point, that will be available on our website as well. So they do have to click on the self-certification form link in order for the rest of the certifications to come up and for the application to be able to be submitted. Once they've done that with the self-certification form, then the legalese appears, all the fine print that says, I am who I am and all the information I've provided is true and correct, and MDHE can share my information with the institution, all that good stuff. They have to check that also before the application can be submitted. And then there's a third optional checkbox that says that whether or not the student is willing to participate in promotional opportunities, and if they check that, then that gives us the permission that we need in order to contact them to get that ball rolling. Once the student has submitted the application, they can monitor the progress of that application in the portal on the My Eligibility and Awards tab. Until we've had a chance to review it, it's going to show the DHE review status. For Fast Track, in this example, the eligibility is incomplete. That could possibly be because they haven't filed their FAFSA yet. If the status is incomplete or ineligible, that eligibility status is a link, and it will take the student either to that FAFSA details tab or the other status details tab, where it will tell them why they are ineligible or incomplete. That functionality isn't hooked up yet for Fast Track, so I don't have a sample of it here, but that's how the process will work. Just kind of in summary for what students need, they do need the Fast Track application, obviously. They do have to file the FAFSA. There are 3 Truth in Lending Act disclosures. There's at the time of application that has just general information in it. At the time of award, which tells them this is how much the school has said they are eligible to receive. And then at the time of disbursement, which confirms this is the amount that you actually received. They do have to provide the self-certification form. Again, that's something that is required for all private loans. That does have to be completed with the school's help if necessary. There's some cost of attendance information and other things that the student might not know offhand and might need help completing. And then that has to be completed and returned before each disbursement. The self-certification form is information for the loan period, and each disbursement is a loan in and of itself, so that's why it's required for each disbursement. And as I had mentioned before, not only is it available on the application, but it's also available on the Fast Track webpage, so the student has access to it at any time. And I also forgot to mention, with the application, I had said that the Truth in Lending Act disclosure is attached in the student workspace. The application itself, once the student submits it, they can have access and see what information they provided through the workspace as well. The student also has to submit the promissory note. Again, in case the grant does become a loan, we have to have that in place so that we can collect on it. And the promissory note does have to be notarized.
Well, let me cut in now, and before we move on to the school portion of our presentation and try and answer, we've gotten a couple of questions, so I'll try and take care of those right now before we move on. The first question is, if the student completed the loan counseling on studentaid.gov, will that suffice for the loan counseling requirement? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. The statute provides a requirement for specific counseling related to this particular program. So while that is focused on ensuring you understand the federal student loan programs and the requirements related to that, this one needs to be specific to this program, particularly since it's a grant that may convert to a loan. So there will need to be separate counseling provided as part of that, and we'll give you some more information about that as we go through the presentation. The second one was, how do we handle programs offered at multiple locations? The information that we're getting is coming from about programs is coming from two sources. One of those sources is our own program inventory that we've maintained for the colleges and universities, and then the other source is in the approved or the educational training provider list that is maintained by the Division of Workforce Development relating to the WIOA program. So the data that we get is from those two sources. Most of those are site-specific, and so the information that we have on our website right now, for example, lists the institution. So I pick the institution, and then it shows which programs are available at which locations. Again, similar to what's in the application. So if there are issues with that, you would need to go to either our program inventory or the training provider site to update it if there's a location that's missing, or if a location is classified incorrectly. That's the place where you would go to correct those issues or to close any of those gaps that might exist. The third question, if someone has borrowed their aggregate loan limit, would they still be eligible if they meet the other criteria? The answer to that would be yes, I believe. Again, I don't think that the aggregate loan limit really relates to federal student loans and the limit of what you can accrue there. It does not include the private loans of this type. So I believe that limit would not affect their eligibility for this particular program. And then the last question is, what is considered a loan period? Is that each year or each semester? When I've referenced loan period in the slide here, I was talking about the repayment time that would be allowed. So it's a 10-year loan for them, and they will pay periodically through that and pay it off either before or at the time they reach 10 years. In terms of the loan period, what we will provide in terms of when they would have to sign another promissory note, that's going to be based on the payment periods. And so for semester-based kinds of programs, most of those are going to occur twice a year at the beginning of each semester as we prepare to make payments to the institution on behalf of the student. For non-standard programs that don't use a semester base, for many of the non-credit programs, clock hour programs, it'll be based on payment periods. And So each payment period would require a separate promissory note, and so that would be the period that would be covered within that. Again, particularly since this is considered a private loan, we have to make those kinds of disclosures each time. Because it's a last dollar program, we don't know how much a student is eligible for. It's not like a program where there's a fixed award amount and we know that going through. This one, we won't know what each particular student is eligible for until the school uploads that information to us and we understand what it is. So we can't make a loan that's going to cover more of a period than just that one payment period. So that's the questions that we have up to this point. And again, we'll jump in again later if we get more. So, and I'll turn it back over to Kelly now.
So for the schools, the first thing that we have to do is get program participation agreements in place. And we will mail those agreements to the financial aid directors in early September. And it will just be an agreement for the Fast Track program. Once Fast Track is up and running, it's going to be incorporated into the 3-year recertification cycle. So in 2022, when we just went through recertification in 2019, when we have to go through it again in 2022, Fast Track will be automatically rolled into that recertification process. The program participation agreements will need to be signed by the president or a designee, and if it's a designee, then there has to be documentation of the designation, so a letter from the president saying this person can sign on my behalf, or a bylaw, something that says that they can sign on behalf of the institution, has to accompany the agreement. The idea is that these agreements will be in place prior to the first disbursements in October so that everything runs smoothly. Schools are primarily going to be responsible for eligibility certification. So the first step in that certification, and this process will be somewhat familiar to the A+ schools. The other schools, this is going to be a learning curve for you, and we'll provide as much information as we can to help you along through the process. And the first step is after the student applies, we've evaluated the eligibility. We will send you a list of, or send the schools a list of their potentially eligible students. Once the school receives that list, they need to verify the student eligibility. So is the student a Missouri resident, U.S. citizen, or permanent resident? Are they enrolled at least half-time in a Fast Track eligible program? Just double check on the age requirement. Are they 25 years old or older, or have they been out of school for at least 2 years? Have there been any changes in their adjusted gross income that would affect their eligibility? Was there a professional judgment or verification that changed their AGI? Does the student have a prior bachelor's degree? And then we need to make sure that they haven't exceeded the 4-semester limit or the 200% of the time typically required for completion. You also need to verify that there aren't any circumstances preventing the student's receipt of federal Title IV aid. And then for renewal students, which will come into play next year, the students do have to have the 2.5 grade point average and otherwise be meeting satisfactory academic progress as defined by the school. So that's similar to some of our other programs. At this point, the school also will need to conduct loan counseling. We are going to provide some materials that will hopefully help with that. You won't necessarily be required to use the materials that we provide, but at least it gives you a place to start, and they will definitely be there as an option. The fourth step is to actually certify the student's eligibility, and that will happen through an Excel file that is saved as a CSV file and will be uploaded into Famous. That file will be available for download on our website, so you would download it, enter the information in the required fields, and there will be a file layout, and then save it as a CSV and upload it into Famous. The upload file will include information on what verification of what program the student is in, their enrollment level, how many hours they're enrolled in, what the tuition rate is, the fees, that are eligible for reimbursement, um, any other aid that they are receiving, and we'll take that information, verify the student's eligibility, and then calculate the award. One of the issues with A+ that we've run into is sometimes schools will have a tendency to provide, like the Pell amount, for example, for the entire program of study rather than just the payment period. So the award components that you will be certifying will be payment period specific, not specific to the program as a whole. And then the last step is to actually upload that certification CSV file into FAMUS. You'll receive a count of how many of the records processed successfully. So if there are errors, everything isn't going to reject. It will only what actually erred will reject, and everything else that was successful will be submitted for processing. If there are errors, then there will be an error file that is produced that will identify the fields that need to be corrected. You can make those corrections and then upload the file back into FAMUS. So once you've certified, then it's going to be a while between the certification and the disbursement, because there are all of the disclosures that have to be made. The student has to accept the award and return the promissory note. And they have a certain period of time that they have to do that in. And then there is, once they've signed the promissory note, they have a certain period of time to cancel the disbursement. So we can't disperse anything until after that cancellation period has passed. And that's, since there is the potential for quite a bit of time between certification and disbursement, once we get the promissory notes from the student, we'll provide a pre-disbursement report that will give you some idea, at least, of how much the student actually signed the promissory note for, if they reduced the award, and so how much you can expect and who you can expect it for. Now, if the student does end up canceling the loan between when they return the promissory note and disbursement, then that pre-disbursement report may not match the actual disbursement exactly. But again, at least it gives you an idea of what to expect. The disbursement the disbursement process will happen through FAMUS like it does for our other programs. The disbursement will be, or the payment process will be initiated after that cancellation period has ended. And then it will be, once we initiate it, it will be the standard 3 to 5 business day time frame before the funds are actually dispersed to the school on behalf of the student. And then once the award is dispersed, then you can see it on the disbursement report that will be available in FAMUS. We have disbursement reports for all of our programs. And then if you have any returns that need to be made, then it's the same process in FAMUS as all of our other programs as well. So we're trying to make Fast Track fit in as much as we possibly can with everything that we already have in place. I'm going to turn it back over to Leroy now.
Okay, well, before I start with this this next slide, we'll go ahead. We've got one more question, and I'll go ahead and address that right now. The question is, when and how often will schools be notified of eligible students? And we're still working through this part of the process. A number of components of this are manual in nature, and so we hope at some point to be able to automate much more of the eligibility and the payment information, but right now a lot of it is manual. So we're going to be doing this kind of based on the workload that we have. So if we get a lot of applications over a period of time, we'll try and get those out as promptly as possible. We'll try and get them out as promptly as we can anyway, but we don't want to overload you with 1 and 2 kinds of uploads of that type, so that you don't provide you with information that may not be actionable. So it's going to be adjustable depending on how many applications we get and what's going on with the program, but we'll try and be as prompt as possible with that. Well, now I'll go back to our slide here. Again, because this program does function quite a bit differently than some of our others, it seemed important to kind of lay out a timeline because it's going to take more time than we're used to. Many of you know with a program like Access Missouri, once you certify that a student is eligible, as Kelly referenced, we usually make sure the money is in your account within 3 to 5 business days. This program functions very, very differently, and so there's going to be more time involved between many steps of this than what we're used to. So in this particular example, we've said it may be as much as 27 days between the time that a student submits their application and the money is being delivered. As you can see here, again, to the question I just answered, we're saying here that it might take 2 business days from the time the application is submitted till we send you, or till the student gets the eligibility notice in the portal. Again, keep in mind, they're going to submit information through that application, but then a person is going to have to take that information, compare it to other data that we have in order to determine, well, is this student really eligible? Once we get that, then we will send that information out. Again, there's processes that'll be in place, things that happen at your institution. After projecting another 10 business days, then the receipt of the award information is available. That student gets another disclosure, and they have the prom note. As Kelly referenced, they do have a period during which we have to provide them the opportunity to cancel that or to change it. So we have to wait for that period of time as well. In this particular instance, we're saying, well, it's going to, you've got that 10-day period, and then we've got the 3 to 5 day period that once we understand what the amount that the student wants, then we'll have that time in order to make that process and get the payment made to the institution. So that's pretty much our presentation, and we do have a few asks of you as well, though. The first one is, if you're an institutional representative, we would ask that you identify someone at your institution that is the fast-track student contact for your school. Because this is a new program, again, there may be a lot of questions. It is relatively complicated, so someone needs to have a pretty deep knowledge to be able to help students with that. In addition, this is an adult-targeted program, so we may have a large number of these who are not entirely comfortable, don't feel at home going to an institution, kind of feel out of place, don't know where to go or how to access resources. So we believe it'd be really, really helpful if there is someone at your institution that really takes the lead in terms of helping students with this program. We would also ask that you send out information to your stop-outs if you have that ability. Again, that's a really good target population for this program, someone who started their post-secondary career, for whatever reason had to drop that and stop out because of various reasons. That's a very high target for this program, and so we would ask, reach out to them, let them know this is out there, help them get access to the information about the program so they can make a good decision about whether this will be helpful to them. And the third one really is just a plea for you to be patient with us. This is a new program. We're ramping it up on an extremely aggressive schedule, and there are a number of components that frankly we don't have a lot of experience with, and so the issue with the programs, for example. So, but please work with us. We want to make this program the best it can be, and we want to partner with you in order to make it a success. So please be patient with us, work with us, give us feedback. Certainly we want to know what works and what doesn't work, but kind of help us work through this first year, and hopefully we can make the second year even better. So again, this is kind of the end of our presentation, but I do have some more questions coming in. The next question on the list is for the employment requirement. Does the 3-year time frame have to be consecutive? And the answer to that is yes. They have to be employed full-time for that entire 3-year period. We'll be able to, again, I probably should have mentioned when I was talking about the administrative rule, the rule hasn't been finalized yet, and so the information that I'm giving that is rule-based is based on the proposed rule, the draft rule as it exists today. when it goes to the coordinating board, and even perhaps in response to some of the comments that we've received during this comment period, there may be some changes to that. But again, what I'm telling you today is the way it works right now. So again, so that 3-year time frame, they have to be employed full time for that 3-year period. We're anticipating providing at least some slack in that. So if someone moves from one job to another, obviously they may not be able to walk in the day immediately after they left their prior job. So there will be some ability there, but in all honesty, it really does need to be pretty much 3 years of continuous employment. The next question is that the first webinar said no minimum education requirement. How does this work with 4 credit programs and filing the FAFSA? Is this more for non-Pell eligible programs? I think it's really, we're trying to serve a very diverse population and provide them access to, I guess I would describe as an unusually diverse set of programs. And so obviously eligibility for this program doesn't override the eligibility for other programs. So if there are programs or there's financial aid, such as the federal programs that essentially require that you've graduated from high school, those are still in place. But again, this particular program does not have that prior education requirement. So that is going to have a particular impact on those non-Pell, non-credit programs, I would predict. Again, you can, in terms of filing the FAFSA, that is a requirement as a part of this. You can complete the FAFSA in that manner, but again, you're not going to get a valid EFC in that regard. So, but we do need the FAFSA in order to collect the adjusted gross income information, which is the way the program determines student need and student eligibility. Our next question is, if a course has a set tuition, a college-specific fee, and an additional online fee per credit hour, are the fees covered? The way the structure works is, again, this is a last dollar tuition and fee program, and so any financial aid that the student, any governmental financial aid that the student receives has to be applied first. So if there's a Pell Grant, if they get Access Missouri, if they get Bright Flight, all of those will stack up first, and then this program will cover any remaining gap in terms of tuition. With fees, the way we've structured that is program-related fees will be covered by this. So the example I've been using is a nursing program. So if there are fees related to the nursing program, all students in that nursing program have to pay this fee, perhaps a uniform fee might be it, then the program would cover that fee as well. However, if there are course-specific fees, so if I'm in a program, I'm in the general education component of an associate's degree program, and I take the chemistry class, and there is a chemistry course fee that needs to be paid, that course fee would not be covered as a part of this program. So then my next question is, if students take AEL courses to brush up for the high set, does this count toward enrollment in an educational program if they're under 25? And the answer to that is yes, that if they take it, the statute is very broad in that regard and talks about having to be out of education for 2 years. And so taking those kinds of courses would trigger that requirement and wouldn't make them ineligible until after that 2-year period had expired. I'll go ahead. We've got some more questions coming in, but I'll go ahead and deal with this last slide. Again, I know there's going to be questions as we go forward. What we've tried to do is kind of divide the work here. If you have questions about the program, about its operations, about how we make payments, anything that's kind of connected to the internal operation of the program, please feel free to connect with any of the financial aid staff that's listed here. If there are student inquiries or general inquiries about the structure of the program, the requirements of the program, those kinds of things, the folks in our success area, Maren Landam and Sarah Shedler, will be happy to answer that. So we're trying to kind of divide up the work in that regard so that people can get the answers that they need as quickly as possible. And then the final question, or at least that I have right now, would be, it says, would surgical tech lab fee be considered a program fee or a course-specific fee. It really depends on how it's applied. If that lab fee is for a specific program and is charged of all students in that course, we would consider that to be a course-specific fee. If it's charged of all students who are in a particular program, then that would be a program fee as opposed to a course-specific fee. So we've kind of reached the end. I would reiterate again, if you could please tell us who you are, if you haven't already. Please, in the chat box, type your name, the institution that you're representing, and then the number of people who are watching with you. If you would do that through the chat function, again, that'll help us understand how many people we've been working with in terms of the program. If you would like, there will be a printed PDF of the PowerPoint that we will make available as well, so you can have access to all of the slides that are involved. And we are, as I mentioned earlier, we are recording the webinar, so if you missed something and want to go back and listen again, or if someone wasn't able to attend and would like to, we'll have this available on our website for you to listen to at a later time. I think we've I don't see any more. My support staff tells me there's no additional questions right now, so unless I get something in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to say I really do appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to learn more about this program, and we're happy that we were able to share some information. I want to say we are really excited about this program. I think it offers us some great potential to fill a gap in our stable of financial aid programs, and as I mentioned earlier, really does target an audience that we need to serve better if we're going to be successful. Well, I see I've got another question coming in, so I'll hang on just a few minutes longer. I don't know very many funny stories, so I won't try to go down that road, but I'll try and answer this question when it comes up. Okay, the question is, what happens if a student drops or changes programs? Well, let me deal with the drop first. It really kind of depends. Because this is an adult-focused program, we've tried to create some flexibility in it that you might not see in some of our other programs, and so there is, I guess, what I would call a grace period that we've provided, because often for students that are attending part-time or adult students, there may be life events that get in their way and require them to stop out for a period. So the student drops, they don't automatically go into repayment. There will be a period of time that they will remain eligible and that will remain a grant in the anticipation that they would re-enter within that time frame. And if they do re-enroll in an eligible program and continue on, then there would be no harm, no foul, and it would, at least potentially, the grant would remain a grant. If they change programs, again, there's not a problem with that. The only issue that would be raised is if they move from an eligible program into an ineligible program. If they leave an eligible program and into an eligible program, they certainly are likely that that their grant's going to convert to a loan, because one of the requirements related to conversion relates to graduation, and so we would have to keep a very close eye on that. So if they transfer from one eligible program to another, there's really not an issue. But if they go into an ineligible program, it does raise the very likely possibility that it would convert into a loan. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions, so I again offer my thanks for you all taking the time out of the day, and again, don't hesitate to reach out to the folks on this last slide if you have additional questions or need information. So thanks.